In clinics, I absolutely love working with the 0 to 2 clients. I suppose it's just wonderful knowing that you can help parents influence positively the future health of their children. And we know that the 0 to 2 years is a time where they develop patterns of eating, develop their preferences and behaviours around eating as well. So it's a really, really great group to work with and really rewarding to work with them.
Welcome to the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. My name is Eamon Keogh. On this episode, we'll be discussing weaning. With parents wanting to do the best for their little ones, this can become a stressful time if things don't go well initially. Common questions include when to start, what type of foods are appropriate, and what if your little one doesn't take to it straight away, and when should you seek help? Joining me to discuss and answer all these questions is Joanne Byrne, HSE Senior Community Dietitian, Dublin North County. You're very welcome to the podcast, Joanne.
Thanks, Eamon. It's lovely to be here.
So we might get straight into it. Can I ask you, what is weaning?
So weaning is the gradual movement of babies from a milk-only diet, so that might be breast milk or infant formula, and moving them to a diet that looks something like what we eat as adults ourselves. So babies move from a single taste of pureed foods to more complex meals and then hopefully to a more varied and balanced diet. You're right, it can be a stressful time for parents. I think weaning comes at a time where they're just getting into the hang of things and suddenly things are turned upside down again and they have to start something new. So today I'm delighted to be here just to share some knowledge about weaning and hopefully give some reassurance to parents that are about to embark on this journey or maybe they're in the midst of it.
Yeah. And can I ask, when should parents think about starting this process?
So it can be confusing for parents to know when to start. And I guess the guidelines have changed somewhat over the years. Going back years ago, the advice might have been somewhere between 4 months and 6 months. And unfortunately, we do see some babies being weaned even before 4 months of age. Walking down the supermarket aisle where there's the baby jars, the pouches, and there's the baby snacks, sometimes people will see 4 months on the outside of the packet. But the current guidelines is to wean your baby onto solid foods at around 6 months. That's the current guideline. The guidelines do go a little bit further to say that you shouldn't introduce solid foods to your baby before 17 weeks. And there's a few reasons for that. The first being that your baby's body just isn't mature enough. In particular, their kidneys and their digestive system isn't ready for solid foods yet.
Yeah.
Another thing to note would be that their milk, be it breast milk or infant formula, is providing all the key nutrients that they need up to the 6-month mark. And also there's an increased risk of developing obesity in later life. Studies have found if you start weaning before 17 weeks.
All right. Okay.
On the other hand, I guess it is important that you don't delay weaning after 26 weeks.
Yeah.
That's for a number of reasons. I guess the milk doesn't provide enough energy after this point for further growth. Iron stores that babies are born with start to be depleted by this time. And I suppose by delaying the introduction of solid foods beyond 26 weeks, you're missing out on key opportunities for developing skills such as self-feeding and also the development of muscles that are involved in speech.
Right. Okay. And typically, what are the signs, I suppose, to look out for within that period when a parent might feel that their baby is ready?
Yeah, so what you'll hear your public health nurse or maybe your doctor talking about is to look out for the signs of readiness. That's what they're called.
Right.
And we've already discussed about babies' bodies, in particular their kidneys,
Yeah.
digestive systems, being sufficiently mature by 4 months. But really, there are other important signs that you need to look out for in terms of their neurodevelopment. And the first one being that the baby is able to sit up with some support and that they'd have good head control. And this is important so that they can manage the process of swallowing.
Right.
The second one would be that they can look at food, they can pick it up and put it into their mouth themselves. And this is looking at their hand-eye coordination. And the third one, finally, that would be a really important sign of readiness to start weaning, is that they can swallow food instead of spitting it back out. And some people might have heard of the tongue thrust reflex. If you do a little test yourself at home, you can put your finger on their bottom lip. And if their tongue instantly comes out, that means that they have that reflex is still quite strong.
Right.
That does lessen as they get to the 6-month mark. So while, there is a window of opportunity, I suppose, for introducing solids between that 17 and 26 weeks, in reality, most of these 3 key neurodevelopment signs are seen closer to the 6 months. And that's hence the guideline to introduce solids to babies around 6 months. There are other signs, I suppose lesser signs, I would say, that maybe baby's not fully satisfied with their milk feeds.
Yeah.
They might be showing interest in food or looking at the food, as you're eating it. These can also be signs of other things. It might be that they're teething or going through a growth spurt. So they're not necessarily signs that baby's ready to start. The first 3 neurodevelopmental signs would be the key things really to look out for.
Okay. So when a parent feels that their baby is ready, is it important to plan before they introduce?
It does. It takes a little bit of planning.
And is there typically a good time to start? Middle of the day or?
Yeah, so typically, I suppose, you don't want your baby to be too tired. And I suppose children, as we all know, tend to get that little bit more tired as the day goes on.
Yeah.
So, it would be, and there's no right or wrong really to this. It's you that's the expert really at the end of the day. You know your baby best.
Yeah.
But I would say in general terms, people would choose kind of somewhere between the morning or even up to lunchtime to introduce kind of those first few spoons. Babies in their best form, they might be, after waking up or having had their nap, so they're not too tired. And ideally, they would have had a milk feed, so be it, a breastfeed or a bottle of their infant formula. I guess you might want to wait a little while after their feed, maybe 30 or 60 minutes before you introduce kind of those first few spoons. So they'll have a little bit of an appetite and a little bit more interest in trying some of those foods. Ideally, we turn off distractions because baby needs to focus really. This is a new skill for them. The fact of accepting food into their mouth, chewing and swallowing, there's a lot there to coordinate. So turning off distractions such as TV, radio, putting your phone away is a good idea too. And making sure that baby is seated comfortably. So you do want to get a high chair, that their neck, their shoulders, their back, their feet are well supported, that they're comfortable, that they're not trying to balance on the chair as well as trying to learn a new skill.
Yeah.
And also that they're sitting facing others. So if there is others at the table or sitting facing you, it is, if you try this yourself, even it's quite difficult to swallow food if you're looking to the side.
Mm.
And it's important as well to communicate with baby. Make sure you make plenty of eye contact and give them positive feedback where you can as well.
Okay. We've talked about the environment and just the readiness, but I just wanted to talk to you now maybe about the food. Typically, what the first foods should be that parents should introduce to their baby.
Yeah, so what I'd say to parents really is that the first 2 weeks in particular is all about just introducing first tastes. You have to remember that this is a really new experience for babies.
Yeah.
All they've been used to up to now for most of 6 months is their infant formula or their breast milk, which may have small changes in flavour.
Yeah.
Pretty similar tastes and textures what they've had up to now. So definitely introducing lots of different new tastes, new textures. There's no pressure to get certain amounts in really in that first 2 weeks. Sometimes people would decide to give baby rice as their first food. As going years back, this was quite common.
Yeah.
We don't hear of baby rice so much these days. For me, I guess weaning is all about introducing the new, and sometimes baby rice, being that it is made up with their usual milk,
Yeah.
it tastes quite the same.
Okay.
It's slightly different texture. But I
Yeah.
suppose if that's someone's preference to start on baby rice, then certainly that's fine. I just maybe wouldn't dwell on it, or you could make additions to the baby rice, such as
Right.
maybe some pureed vegetables just to change it up a little bit. Vegetable first weaning is quite popular at the moment, and there is some UK evidence to show that babies that start on bitter vegetables, so that would be like your broccoli, spinach, asparagus, cauliflower, potato, those bitter tasty vegetables are more likely to accept those tastes going forward.
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting approach, I guess. And, certainly around the 6 month mark and even 6 months to 12 months, we find that babies are more accepting of new tastes.
Mm.
So that can be quite a good start to babies, weaning journey is to start them on vegetables and those bitter tastes. But really, there's very little right or wrong here. And there's loads of options that you can start with. Certainly,
Yeah.
it can be the vegetables, it can be the baby rice, but equally it could be cereals. It could be your Weetabix or your Ready Break. Porridge is quite a good one too, but we do tend to encourage the more iron fortified cereals like the Weetabix or the Ready Break, like I've said. Other options would be like fruit, although babies are born with a natural preference for sweet foods. And certainly sometimes people, will introduce those a little bit later.
Yeah.
Certain fruits are naturally soft, like bananas mash up really well.
Yeah.
Peaches, apples, you might have to stew to make them kind of a suitable consistency. Some people think that meat, you can't introduce that until babies have teeth, but actually that's not the case, and that's a suitable first food too. Things like poultry, fish. Once it's in a suitable texture, a pureed for your baby, then it's absolutely fine as a first food.
Very good. That's interesting about the bitterness. I was going to ask you about that just in terms of flavor. Do you have more chance of success if it's
Yeah,
sweeter
yeah,
or?
that's what the evidence says. So I suppose babies are more likely to accept sweet taste because we're,
Yeah.
we're all born with, I guess, a preference for the sweet and the salty taste.
Yeah.
So the idea with the vegetable first weaning is that you introduce the bitter vegetables and then keep them going as you start to introduce the more sweeter things like the fruits and the cereals and your meat and your poultry as you go on. Just to mention as well, I guess, while you're pureeing, suitable liquids, to use to puree the foods will be the likes of expressed breast milk. You can use the infant formula. You can even use a little bit of cow's milk if you wish. That's fine to use in small amounts to puree foods,
Yeah.
but it's not suitable as a main drink up until, the baby is 12 months. So just important to note that.
Okay. In terms of quantity, what sort of quantity should you be looking at?
So to start, really, you're looking at just 1 or 2 teaspoons.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really small amounts.
Yeah.
And because such a new experience, for babies. So we do have to have patience with them. And it's important for you to let baby be the guide. Once they, work up to 5 or 6 teaspoons, you can start to introduce a second meal and so on until you have your 3 small meals, roughly evenly spaced throughout the day. There's no set times as such. It'll really depend on your schedule, but in general, that they're evenly spaced throughout the day. And we would recommend that parents, I guess, follow a practice like responsive feeding. So that would be to look for the signs of hunger from their baby.
Mm.
And if they're seeing, the baby's really excited by the food and they're kind of grabbing the spoon almost off you, then absolutely continue and to give them a little bit more.
Yeah.
But equally, if you see that baby's becoming kind of disinterested, if they're getting a little bit distressed maybe, or if they're pushing the spoon away, turning their head, that's all signs really that they're full and that would be a time to stop. So they're really good at regulating their own appetite, and that's a really great skill to respect and encourage them to listen into their tummies when they're hungry and when they're full.
Yeah. Okay. And what about texture as well? Is that important?
Texture is really important, yeah. So I suppose the traditional method of weaning would be to introduce the purees first. So you're looking at kind of a thin puree or like a yogurt consistency. But as time goes on, you're looking to introduce some texture so that somewhere between 6 and 9 months, really that babies are on more of a mashed diet. And this doesn't happen really overnight. I would also say to parents that you're gradually trying to push your baby forward in terms of texture and that you're making that puree that little bit thicker, using a little bit less liquid as you go on. And suddenly you're adding no liquid at all and you're just mashing their foods. It is really important to make sure that there are some small lumps in your baby's food by 10 months. And that's really important because it is quite difficult to introduce some lumps and texture after that time.
Mm.
Also, I guess the textured and the lumpy food does again develop the muscles in the mouth that's so important for speech. And I understand completely it can be really a nervous time for parents. And I understand completely the anxieties around progressing babies sometimes with texture, but it is really important. But it also can be a gradual process just to make it a little bit easier for baby and a little bit easier for the parent.
Yeah. And what type of foods aren't suitable?
There's not a long list of foods that are unsuitable, but there are some. The first one that everyone seems to know about would be from a food safety point of view, and that's not to give honey to babies before they're 12 months of age. And that's for the risk of botulism. And there's a couple of other things then from a food safety point of view. Undercooked meat or undercooked eggs wouldn't be suitable. We do have to remember that babies' immune systems are still maturing. In terms of safety in general, then whole or chopped nuts would be
Mm.
unsuitable from a choking point of view. Whole grapes would be, unsuitable. Anything round, I guess. If you think like even blueberries, I would tend to squish them. Cherry tomatoes, grapes in particular, you do need to cut them lengthways, even into quarters if you're offering them to baby. Boiled sweets and sausages, again, from a choking point of view, would be unsuitable for babies.
Okay.
From a nutrition point of view, we do say not to add any sugar, not to add any salt to babies' meals. And then there will be some foods that are particularly high in salt. Things like gravy, packet soups, processed or cured meats, so like your ham, bacon, sausages. High fat, high sugar foods, things like crisps, chocolate, cake, really, I suppose, are unsuitable for babies. So we're talking about kind of 6 to 12-month-old babies here. Even into their second year, we'd always encourage parents to try, for as long as kids aren't aware with them, to try and, get away without
Yeah.
introducing them. It's difficult for toddlers, I guess, especially if there's older siblings in the house. You're trying to get that balance and you don't want them to feel restricted either because it puts those foods up on a pedestal. But certainly, I suppose, for the age group that we're talking about today, for the 6 to 12-month-olds, there's really no need for those foods in their diet. And in fact, their tummies are so small, you want to make sure they're getting all the nutrients that they need for growing and not filling their bellies with things of little nutrients, like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sweets and the cakes and whatnot. But there's a couple of other foods then that wouldn't be suitable from a nutrient point of view. Bran would be one of those things that prevents the absorption really of things like iron and calcium from baby's diet. Things like liver would be quite high in vitamin A, so that wouldn't be suitable either. And then drinks like tea, coffee, again, they can prevent the absorption of iron from baby's diet, but also they're high in caffeine, and juices will be quite high in sugar. So really the most suitable drinks while we're talking about that would be milk and water for babies and for young children, and certainly for babies of 6 to 12 months of age, it's their infant formula or their breast milk.
Okay. Is it okay to let them use their hands?
Absolutely. And I suppose, we'd say that from the word go. Baby wants to dive in straight away, with their hands
Get as messy as possible.
as messy as possible. So this is going to be a nightmare scenario to a lot of people. It's not just about the nutrition. For babies, it's a whole sensory experience. Think of it really, especially at the start, as almost like a playtime. Now you sit down with baby and they're really going to enjoy that, and they're going to get their hands in. The food will be all over them, all over their hair and all over your floor, unfortunately. But, it does get better. But to accept the new foods and the new tastes, they really need to get to grips with the texture, and they do that with their hands. They can bring it to their mouth and smell it, and they get to visually look at the colours. It's all so different and so new. So absolutely, I would make sure that they get involved with their hands. But also if you're using spoons, sometimes baby will want to grab the spoon and kind of feed themselves too.
Yeah.
That's all really, really positive. So often in terms of equipment, we've already talked about a high chair, but in terms of getting spoons, ideally like a flat spoon where the bowl part is flat so baby can easily clear the food from the spoon. But if you think baby's going to start feeding themselves, it might be a good idea to get a short handled one so it'll increase the chances of getting it into their mouth.
Yeah.
When they move on, then by 7 months old, babies will slightly differ. And again, like the parent is the expert, they know in terms of what the eating competence level is of their child. But roughly around 7 months, it is a good idea to introduce finger foods. And by finger foods, I mean literally the size and the shape of your adult baby finger, because babies can easily latch onto your finger, and they often do.
Yeah.
So if you pair finger foods that are of that shape and that size, baby will easily able to put that in their hand and then take off little bits by themselves.
And what type of finger foods would you recommend?
So initially I would start off with soft finger foods. If we were to say we're starting at 7 months, overcooked vegetables really would be the best. So you're talking about, broccoli, maybe some cauliflower. They can easily hold the little floret in their hand.
Yeah.
Things like banana, you can cut that lengthways and put it in their hand. And those are really, really soft foods.
And carrots?
Carrots, yeah, absolutely. Making sure that you cut the carrots similar size, because one carrot might be suitable and the next might not. So it's important, I always say, to do kind of like a squish test where you squish the food between your index finger and your thumb just to make sure that it is soft enough. And you don't have to wait until babies have teeth to introduce finger foods. You absolutely don't. If you've ever had to put your baby finger into their gums, you find that their gums are really hard and they can really manage, finger foods, no problem from 7 months. As they move on, then kind of towards 9 to 12 months, they can manage more complex finger foods, maybe things like meatballs or fish cakes. And then by this stage, you might want to challenge them, help them develop their pincer grip by offering them smaller pieces of food. And it's really interesting to watch kids try and feed themselves like that.
Yeah.
But by 9 to 12 months, we've moved on now from purées and the mash food. And really, you're aiming towards your child joining in with the family meals and eating chopped family meals and hopefully starting to self-feed as well.
Okay. And where can parents get more information on the types of foods or ideas for preparation?
In terms of types of foods and recipes, I suppose I think the best thing to do really at the start is almost sit down with a blank page and pen and just list the different foods that you eat in your family. So maybe under the different kind of food groups.
Yeah.
So what cereals or what, kind of carbohydrate, starchy foods do you eat in your family? Same with fruit and veg or dairy. Those are the foods that you want to get into your baby's diet because, there are loads of recipe books out there, but little point in cooking these fancy meals, which you might have the time for, if you're not at work. But if they become accustomed to those, flavors and those meals, it can be really hard to introduce then kind of like your bog standard meals that you might cook when you're back at work or you're a little bit busier. So if it's spaghetti bolognese or if it's lasagna or if it's meat and two veg that you eat in your family, those are the types of foods that you need to start with and getting in early. But sometimes, when babies are starting weaning in a house, it can be a good opportunity for the whole family to sit down and say, well, actually, maybe we don't have that many recipes in our repertoire. And, to go to the recipe books and try and expand and maybe introduce more variety into their diet, it can be a good opportunity. There's also safefood.net, which is quite a good resource. They do have some recipes and some videos on there as well.
Right.
So yeah, plenty of ideas there.
Very good. And I guess there'll be ups and downs for parents as well in this. So something might work or a baby might like one week or one day and then another day they won't. But I guess that's part of the process though, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's completely normal. And it's
Yeah.
important for parents to realise that. And that's why I guess I always refer to weaning as a journey.
Yeah.
So it's not a linear line that goes upwards, that they progress, with their food and the variety as they go. There's always lots of ups and downs, and it's really important for parents just to realise that their food intake will be affected by many different things.
Yeah.
For one, if they have any sort of a sickness or a virus, if they're teething, their food intake is going to be less, and that's absolutely normal. Likewise, if they're going through a growth spurt, they might have an increased appetite. So it's really ups and downs, and I suppose we're not aiming for perfection.
Yeah.
It's not possible with babies or young kids. And what I'd always say to parents really is not looking at one meal in isolation or even one day.
Mm.
Looking at their meals really more so over a week, and looking at the trend is important.
Just to focus on food refusal for the moment, what should parents do here?
Yes, this question comes up, time and time again. It's a real concern for parents, when
Yeah.
this doesn't happen. But again, just to say this is really normal. And I would say most babies are going to go through some period of food refusal at some point. And as we said, there are lots of reasons why there might be some setbacks. It might be that they're sick, or it might be that they're too tired. So I would say to parents, do a little bit of detective work. It might be easily explained by that they are sick at the moment or they are tired. You could look at their overall milk intake for the day.
Yeah.
Maybe they're on a little bit too much milk for the stage that they're at, or is their milk feeds too close to a mealtime? So you could play around with those things, or even just going back to the basics that we talked about, the meal environment. Is there too many distractions? Are they comfortable in their chair? That's a really important one as well. So going back to those things, if parents are concerned and you feel that they're really not eating enough, then it would be important to talk to your public health nurse, talk to your GP, and you can always get your baby weighed as well. That'll be a really good sign of whether they are getting enough as well. And I suppose if there is a need for onward referral to the likes of myself and primary care dietitians,
Yeah.
then your public health nurse or your GP can do that.
And I just wanted to talk to you about allergies now. And a lot of parents worry about this when introducing new foods.
They do. And again, I do some weaning workshops, to parents about weaning. And as soon as we come onto the topic of allergies, the questions come flying in. It's a really, really big concern for parents. But I suppose just to say from the offset, Eamon, that it is rare. At the same time, it is good for parents to be aware of the signs and the symptoms of allergy. And these are all listed on the mychild.ie website.
Okay.
And that's a really great resource for people to refer to for all things weaning. The signs and symptoms of allergy are listed there. The main allergens that we're talking about would be milk, egg, fish, peanut, and wheat. Babies that are fed infant formula will have already been exposed to cow's milk, but this is a new allergen that you need to consider for breastfed babies. My advice around the introduction of allergens will be to include on a day that baby's well. So we've already discussed that babies can be upset, in terms of teething or sickness from time to time. But really, I suppose if you are to know whether baby is upset by food in terms of that they have signs of allergy, make sure that you can differentiate it from, maybe a sickness, or if they're teething, for example. It's a good idea to introduce the allergens in the morning time, so you can just kind of monitor baby for the rest of the day and see if there is any signs or symptoms of allergy. So you can introduce a small amount into their usual food, for example, their breakfast cereal, or just give a small amount of that allergen on a spoon. And it is important in this case not to let baby feed themselves the allergen food and smear it all over their face.
Yeah.
It's actually really important to deliver the spoon of that allergen directly into their mouth, and just to make sure that they've eaten it. And then obviously monitor then for signs and symptoms. We do say with the allergen foods to provide it and then wait 2 or 3 days before you give some more or you introduce another allergen, just because it can take up to 3 days to see some signs and symptoms of allergy. There's not necessarily any order to introducing the allergens, with the exception of egg before peanut. Sometimes if there is signs and symptoms of allergy to egg, it can be just to raise a flag that there might be some symptoms with peanut as well. And an important point to make is for parents, if the child does tolerate egg and peanut, that it is important to keep it in their diet 2 to 3 times a week. And there's a study in the UK, the LEAP study, that showed and followed kids up to the age of 6 and actually found that it's important to keep it in their diet regularly, in fact, up to the age of 5, to ensure that they maintain that tolerance to those allergens.
Yeah.
But my most important message really around allergens is that the current evidence is really to introduce them sooner rather than later. And that's the best way of reducing the risk of developing an allergy to that food. So I suppose historically, there might have been periods where people were advised to avoid certain allergens, but that's really not the case now. And we talked about that first 2 week window where you're just trying out different things, maybe the vegetables or the fruit, the cereals. After that, I would start to think about introducing the allergen foods just to reduce that risk of developing an allergy.
Okay. And just to talk about milk for a second, actually, is there a balance to be struck there in terms of, introducing milk?
Yeah, this is always a really big question for parents. They've introduced the food and we tend to give a lot of advice around that, but then they're like, what are we doing with the milk? Where does that fit in? And
Yeah.
between 3 meals and introducing some snacks and finger food, where is the room in the day really for introducing the milk? Babies are going to need their breast milk or their infant formula up to at least the age of 12 months.
Yeah.
And from then they can move on to cow's milk. In terms of breastfeeding, it is encouraged by the WHO actually to continue breastfeeding up to the age of 2 and beyond. And this provides lots of benefits to children. For bottle feeding, then, or infant formula feeding, there will be a gradual reduction in milk over time as they increase their intake of solid foods.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, a baby that has not started weaning yet might be, between 4 and 6 months, but might be on roughly 1,000 mils or 33 ounces of milk. This might reduce to 600 mils or 20 ounces of milk by 7 to 9 months.
Right.
And then by 10 to 12 months, that might reduce further to 400 mils or 13 ounces. Those are rough guides. Some children will take slightly more, some will take slightly less. If you find that they're not taking in very much solids and they're on quite a lot of milk, you might just want to look at those guides and slightly nudge that baby closer to what the recommended amounts are in terms of milk. Breastfed babies tend to kind of regulate their own and, I suppose, intake of milk. And what we'd advise breastfeeding mothers is to have that schedule of meals and let babies then breastfeed on demand around that. In terms of timing of the bottles, people will often ask which bottle do I take out. But really, I suppose if the first decrease in milk around the 6 to 9 months, that's 600 mils roughly. They might have a bottle in the morning time, they might have a bottle in the evening, and then kind of 1 or 2 in the middle. In terms of the exact timings, it really depends on your own schedule, and parents have the freedom to fit them in where it suits them.
I suppose when you are reducing the bottle and that, how do parents ensure that babies are getting enough nutrients?
So it can be tricky to know that your child is getting enough nutrients. There aren't specific portion size recommendations for under 12 months.
Yeah.
So my best advice would be to make sure that your child is getting a variety of different foods.
Back to your list.
Exactly. Yeah. Back to your list and making sure that they're getting foods from all the different food groups. After that 2 week window of first taste, that's when, as we said, you start to introduce some of the allergen foods, but also try to put some balance on the meals. So we're looking at 3 key things really in terms of meal times that you include a carbohydrate food. That would be like your potatoes, cereals, pasta, rice. That you include protein food or an iron-rich food. That would be like your meat or your poultry, your fish, eggs, beans, peas, lentils, and also to include a fruit or vegetable as well. So getting some balance there in terms of how you kind of set up the meals in terms of your 3 things, your carbohydrates, your protein or your iron-rich foods, and your fruit or vegetables. I do give specific mention there to iron because, as we've said already, babies are born with iron stores, but these do become depleted by 6 months. The requirement for iron for young kids actually is quite large when you compare it to their size and the amount of food that they take in. So it is a key nutrient and one definitely for parents to keep in mind. The best sources of iron will be things like red meat. A recent research has shown that Irish kids rely quite heavily on iron-rich fortified cereals.
Yeah.
But also things like eggs or green leafy vegetables would be also good sources of iron.
Okay, very good. As the baby's diet is changing, what should parents be watching out for?
Introducing solids to a baby's digestive system, sometimes they can experience some constipation.
Yeah.
So it's just maybe parents to watch out for that. There are 3 key things, when we talk about constipation, to ensure that baby's getting enough fluids is important. And really their milk intake, be it breast milk or infant formula, is going to be the main drink really up to 12 months. But at the time of weaning, you can also introduce some water in a beaker or an open cup. It does have to be cooled boiled water up to 12 months. But we're really not talking about large amounts of this. Really, it's just kind of a few sips at meal times, putting an ounce or 2, 30 or 60 mils in a beaker or a cup for them to get used to the taste of water, which, would be good for them going forward, but also the flow of water into their mouth. So that would be the fluids. Introducing a little fibre into baby's diet, is important as well to prevent constipation. Things like their fruits and their vegetables, things like pulses, beans, peas, lentils are really good sources of fibre as well. We do have to be careful for the under twos. I guess we don't want to include too much fibre in their diet because fibre, as we know, is quite bulky.
Yeah.
Their tummies are small, and we do want to ensure that they are getting enough energy and enough protein for growth. And it is a time of rapid growth. So you just have to get the balance with that, really. And oftentimes I say to parents that you don't want to go all high fibre. So certainly not everything brown in terms of brown bread, whole wheat pasta, brown rice, lots of fruit and veg. Just be mindful. Portions of fruit and veg are a baby's hand size. And you might want to swap things like maybe some white bread, some whole wheat pasta, changed up just to make sure that they're not getting too much fibre. And I suppose the third thing then in terms of constipation would be physical activity. So for babies that obviously at this age group, they're not walking yet,
Yeah.
but you might like to do some like cycling up their legs, some tummy time, or there's lots of videos actually online as well of some tummy massage. A warm bath sometimes can help with that as well.
Okay, very good. And can I just ask about you, if you don't mind? Are you working in this area long?
I am. So I started my career actually in an adult teaching hospital. So I spent almost 10 years there, but I decided it was time for change. And I moved to the community to work in primary care in 2016.
Right.
So alongside some colleagues in Dublin North, I do provide some weaning workshops to parents. And we do this on quite a regular basis. I found there was a study by Safe Food a number of years ago where parents reported that they really did want evidence-based advice in a timely manner, so kind of at the time of weaning. And we do certainly always say to parents that you can always come back to the weaning workshops again a couple of months later, if they want to.
Yeah. Are they popular, the workshops?
They're really popular, really popular, yeah. And again, lots and lots of questions. Lots of the same questions, I guess, will come up time and time again. But I suppose parents are just looking for that reassurance and confidence. But in clinics, I absolutely love working with the 0 to 2 clients. I suppose it's just wonderful knowing that you can help parents influence positively the future health of their children. And we know that the 0 to 2 years is a time where they develop patterns of eating, develop their preferences and behaviours around eating as well. So it's really, really great group to work with and really rewarding to work with them. I'm also a breastfeeding counsellor and I volunteer with my local breastfeeding support group. It's a small amount of people that do breastfeed, although the rates are increasing, which is great to see. But I love being able to empower and support parents on their breastfeeding journeys as well.
Oh, very good. Actually, I was just thinking when you were saying there about it's to start well, isn't it?
Absolutely, to get a good start.
We often talk about the food environment around us at the moment and what kids are exposed to in terms of high salt, high fat diet. So this really is a time when parents are in control and have the opportunity to introduce.
Absolutely, and it is possible to influence their preferences, the foods they enjoy, the foods they love. So it's really, really great opportunity for parents.
Yeah. Very good. I suppose also sometimes parents are reluctant to ask for help, are they?
They can be. I suppose if anything from this podcast, I've said that a lot of these blips in the journey are normal, you know, and that's the case. But I suppose it is always nice to get reassurance and the help and the advice is there. So people can approach their public health nurse, their GP. They can make referral to like their primary care dietitian if needed. There's also a nice information in the 0 to 2 My Child book that the public health nurses provide.
Right.
So there is a weaning section in there. There's also some videos that have been recently made on the mychild.ie YouTube channel. And as I said before as well, the safefood.net have some really great advice and some recipes there as well for parents too.
And can I just ask about the common challenges that you find parents face? I know you've talked a lot about
We have touched on some of them. So I guess, food refusal would be probably the main one. Allergies, if you did feel that your baby's not gaining, enough weight or not eating, it would be really important to touch base there with your GP for a growth assessment. And obviously they can be referred on then if needs be. Choking fears are always one of the main questions for parents as well. And the gagging, I guess, is a normal reflex that babies have. It's kind of a protective mechanism to prevent them actually from choking.
What's the difference between
It can be really confusing. I suppose the first step is for parents to know the difference.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, the gagging reflex is a normal reflex, although it can be quite terrifying to see if you see it for the first time. But in general, I suppose that's just the baby kind of working through that difficulty that they're having. They're moving maybe food from the back of their mouth to the front, just to chew it a little bit again and maybe swallow it the next time. They tend to turn kind of a slightly reddish colour, but it's completely normal. It's really important, I guess, to kind of hide your anxiety really at that stage, because almost you might make the baby feel a little bit anxious. But it is a totally normal reflex and it does lessen over time. It's really important actually that people do progress with the textures, as I said before, to lessen that gag reflex that they have. And if you continue them on a pureed consistency, then actually you're not challenging that reflex and it might persist. Choking, on the other hand, warrants immediate action because the airway is blocked. I guess the child can be quite silent. They might turn kind of a bluish colour. And on the HSE website, it would be great for people to look at what to do in the event of a choking episode. It is important to know what to do for the under ones. Sometimes, organisations will offer first aid courses for parents, be it online or in person. They're quite accessible now, actually, and a lot of parents do decide to do those, just even for peace of mind.
Okay, great. We're coming to the end of this episode actually now, but I have one final question for you. If you were to give 3 top tips to parents out of everything that we've talked about on this episode, what would they be?
The first one would be to offer lots and lots of variety. So in terms of colour, the different food groups, even different shapes of the same food. For example, carrots that you give it mashed, you give it in the finger food, the fingers, you might roast it, you might boil it, cooking it different ways as well.
Yeah.
There is a window between 6 months and 12 months where babies are quite accepting of new tastes and new textures. So this is a really kind of good time to take advantage of that and offer lots of different foods and lots of different tastes. I always tell parents to just bear in mind that what they eat as a 9-month-old has been shown to be really reflective of what they'll eat as a 5-year-old. So you want to get lots and lots of variety in now.
Yeah.
And I suppose as they come to the fussy stage, which lots of kids do, it's a little bit later on, maybe 15 months, tends to peak around 20 months. But if you can get as much variety in now, then they should just get over that stage and come out the other side. In terms of texture, I think that would be my second tip. Really, you can understand, in terms we talked about the gag reflex and the fear of choking. Parents do have a lot of worries and concerns around that. Unfortunately, we do see kids, sometimes referred to us that maybe are 2 years of age and are on purée diets. And I did mention that key window really of getting the texture and the soft lumps into babies' diets at the latest by 10 months.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to offer the finger foods. It provides, again, lots of variety to children, opens up a world of foods and develops their skills in terms of chewing as well. So that would be, definitely the texture one to keep in mind. And finally, I suppose my last tip would be to parents just to relax. It's to try and go with the flow, I guess,
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done, absolutely. And I've been there a few times myself. But children are very good at picking up on anxieties as well. So to try and relax, if they are refusing foods, that's completely normal. Take 10 to 15 times for them to try, a food sometimes before they'll accept it. That's all completely normal. And I suppose throughout this podcast, we've talked about the different blips that come up on the weaning journey. And most of the time, they're completely normal. So just, I hope parents can take some reassurance from that. And sometimes it's best just to sit back, to feed yourself and to role model. And, you're doing some good in that too. So hopefully that will help parents just feel a little bit more confident on their weaning journey with their kids. I did say not to have any phones and no distractions, but I think the weaning photos and pictures are mandatory. Absolutely. Take some photos.
They taste sour vegetables for the first time.
Absolutely. I think the more bitter the taste actually make for a better photo. So to be sure to do that and just enjoy this time. It's another milestone, I guess, with their kids. So
very good. Thank you for all that. Some really great advice there. And I'd like to thank Joanne Byrne for joining me today. To all our listeners, thank you for your continued support and please share this episode. If you would like more information about HSE Health and Wellbeing, follow us on X, take a look at our HSE Health and Wellbeing YouTube channel, or register for our e-zine by emailing healthandwellbeing.communications@hse.ie. This has been the HSE Talking Health and Wellbeing podcast. Thank you for listening.